I arrived at Tyler's place expecting nothing more than a fun, memorable night. A surprise party thrown in his honor for his 35th birthday. The atmosphere was light, filled with familiar laughter and the clinking of glasses, as old friends and new faces mingled in celebration. Yet beneath the warm buzz of the festivities, a nagging unease had been growing inside me for weeks. Amanda, my wife, had been acting off lately. I noticed the way her eyes would drift somewhere else in the middle of conversations and the subtle detachment in her smiles. I tried to brush it off as nothing more than the pressures of everyday life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Tyler, with his usual magnetic charm, flitted between groups of guests, making sure everyone was having a good time. I attempted to immerse myself in the merriment, laughing along with stories and sharing in the revelry. But even as I raised my glass to toast another year of Tyler's life, my thoughts kept straying back to Amanda. I'd been dismissing the growing suspicion as an overactive imagination, yet every time I caught a glimpse of her, a pang of doubt would strike me. Not long after the initial greetings and small talk, Tyler's girlfriend pulled me aside, her expression tinged with worry. In a low, urgent tone, she said, "Lucas, can you do me a favor? Could you check out the bar in the guest room for me?" There was a tremor in her voice that I couldn't ignore. I hesitated for only a moment, uncertain why she would need me to investigate her room on a night meant for celebration. But her plea was earnest and left little room for argument. I agreed, figuring it was just one of those quirky party favors that always seemed to crop up unexpectedly. Walking away from the cheerful chaos of the main room, I followed her directions down a quieter corridor. The hall was dimly lit and much more intimate than the bustling party area. I had expected to find nothing more than a bit of extra decor, or perhaps a forgotten bottle of liquor. But what I encountered in that secluded space shattered any illusion of a normal night. In the soft, ambient light of the bar area, I froze. There, in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, I saw Amanda, my Amanda, locked in a passionate embrace with a man I didn't recognize. The sight was surreal. The way she leaned into his kiss, the intensity of their closeness, and the unmistakable chemistry between them spoke volumes. There was no hesitation, no trace of the familiar warmth that I had known from her touch before. Instead, I was witnessing a raw display of intimacy that left no room for doubt. She was with someone else. For a long, agonizing moment, I stood there rooted to the spot. My mind raced with questions that cut deeper than any words could. Who was this man? How long had this been happening? Had I been so blind to everything, so wrapped up in my own thoughts, that I missed the signs? The very idea that Amanda, the woman I had trusted, the person I believed I knew, could betray me in such a visceral, public manner was almost too much to bear. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, each beat a painful reminder of the trust that was being torn apart right before my eyes. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her, to demand an explanation, but I found myself paralyzed by shock and disbelief. The world around me faded into a blur as I focused solely on the scene unfolding in that small, dimly lit room. I felt as if I were watching someone else's life play out, a life where betrayal was the central theme, and I was the unwilling witness. The man in Amanda's arms didn't seem to notice my presence at all, lost in the fervor of their shared moment. His eyes were closed, and his expression was one of unbridled passion, completely at odds with the crushing weight of my discovery. The gentle sound of their whispered words and soft laughter, once comforting as background noise at the party, now only deepened the sting of betrayal. Every second felt interminable, as though the universe had decided to slow down time just to prolong my torment. I took a cautious step back, my feet feeling heavy as though anchored by the enormity of what I'd just seen. The familiar scent of Amanda's perfume, normally so comforting, now seemed tainted by the unmistakable odor of another man's cologne, a sensory reminder that the life I thought I knew was crumbling before me. Every detail of that illicit encounter was etched into my mind with cruel clarity. The way her hand caressed his shoulder, the intensity of their embrace, and even the subtle movements that betrayed a deep-seated familiarity between them. In that instant, my mind became a battleground of emotions. Anger surged through me, mingling with profound sadness and a sense of utter betrayal. I felt as though I were witnessing the final act of a tragedy, a love story that had taken a dark, irreversible turn. The shock was overwhelming, leaving me speechless and stricken with a kind of despair that I'd never experienced before. I longed to scream, to call out her name and demand answers, but all I could manage was a silent, desperate numbness. As I slowly backed away from the door, every step felt like a painful farewell to the life I had once known. The vibrant echoes of the party were a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality of the betrayal I'd just uncovered. I retreated into the corridor, my mind reeling with a tumult of thoughts and emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. I didn't know how I was going to face Amanda, or even Tyler, after what I had seen. The shock of the moment had rendered me incapable of processing anything beyond the raw, searing pain of betrayal. The truth, stark and unyielding, had revealed itself in the dim light of a guest room bar. In that solitary, heart-wrenching instant, I realized that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I had stepped into a celebration with the hope of sharing in a friend's joy, only to find myself entangled in a web of deceit and heartache. It was a turning point, the moment when every doubt, every lingering suspicion, crystallized into a painful certainty. Walking back toward the main room, I felt as if I were living in two different worlds. Behind me lay the dark, silent corridor of betrayal, a place I wished I could forget. Ahead, the party continued unabated, filled with laughter and music that now seemed horribly out of place. I was caught between two realities, one of forced merriment and one of grim, shattering truth. I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with difficult questions. The events of that night had thrown my entire life into chaos, leaving me to wonder how I could ever piece together the fragments of trust that had been so callously broken. Even as I rejoined the party, every smile, every friendly gesture felt like a hollow echo of the life I once believed in. The night had taken an irrevocable turn, and I was left alone with a heart heavy with betrayal and a mind swirling with uncertainty about what the future would hold. That night, under the guise of celebration, I encountered a reality I had never imagined, a reality where love and trust were fragile, easily shattered by a single, unforeseen moment. The shock of that discovery has haunted me ever since, a constant reminder that sometimes the most profound betrayals occur in the quiet, unassuming moments when we least expect them. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest as I stood there, processing the scene before me. I expected a surge of fury, an eruption of emotions that would burst forth uncontrollably, but instead, something else took over. Despite the shock, I felt an unsettling calm settle over me. I stepped forward, my voice measured and steady in the charged silence, and said, "I don't want to bother you." Those words, spoken so softly, yet carrying the full weight of my inner turmoil, seemed to suspend time itself. In that instant, Amanda and Derek froze in place, as if my simple statement had cast a spell over them. They stood there like statues, Amanda's eyes wide with disbelief and a trace of regret, and Derek's face caught in a mask of stunned shock. The intimacy they had shared just moments before was now an uncomfortable, frozen tableau of betrayal. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on us. The rest of the guests, who had once been laughing and chatting, now watched in a heavy, silent awe. No one moved to intervene or break the spell that had overtaken the room. It was as though the entire party had been drawn into a single, suspended heartbeat of collective disbelief. I saw whispers of shock and sorrow etched on faces all around me, a quiet testimony to the magnitude of what had just occurred. The silence was more overwhelming than any shout or outburst could have been. In that hushed moment, every sound, from the faint murmur of the music in the background to the occasional clink of a glass, seemed miles away. My words, delivered with an unexpected serenity, reverberated through the space and deepened the frozen stillness. I wasn't angry. I wasn't screaming or pleading for an explanation. I simply stated my truth, accepting the unbearable weight of the betrayal without adding fuel to the already blazing fire. I found myself caught in a bizarre duality. Part of me wanted to storm forward and demand answers, to force Amanda to confront the reality of what she had done. But another part of me, a quieter, more resigned side, recognized that no words would undo the damage or bring back the trust that had been so carelessly shattered. Instead, I chose to let the silence speak for me, to let the gravity of the moment settle in its own time. The guests around me seemed equally paralyzed by the unfolding drama. They stood like silent onlookers at a scene too raw and painful to disrupt, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and curiosity. Some faces looked away, unable to bear the intensity of what was happening, while others remained locked in place, their eyes wide and unblinking. The collective stillness of the room was as heavy as a physical force, pressing down on all of us with a profound sense of inevitability. I could see the internal conflict playing out in Amanda's eyes, a storm of regret, fear, and something akin to resignation. In that unspoken exchange, it was clear that the life we once shared had been irrevocably altered. Derek, too, was caught in that frozen moment, his presence a stark reminder of the unexpected twist that had led us here. His earlier passion had vanished, replaced by a vacant shock that mirrored Amanda's inner turmoil. In that silent, charged space, I began to realize that this was not a moment for confrontation or accusatory outbursts. It was a moment of painful acceptance, a realization that the fabric of our lives was tearing apart right before my eyes. The calmness in my voice wasn't indifference. It was the only response I could muster when every instinct screamed for a reaction that I simply couldn't give. As I took in the frozen tableau before me, I felt the magnitude of the evening's events settling like a heavy fog around us all. The surreal calm that had overtaken me was not a sign of weakness, but rather a deep, reluctant acknowledgement of the reality we were now forced to confront. With every silent second that passed, the truth of that moment embedded itself further into my heart, a truth that would alter the course of my life forever. And so, in the midst of a celebration that had taken a devastating turn, I stood there with nothing more to say than the quiet admission that resonated through the room. The silence that followed was both an end and a beginning, a still, powerful punctuation to a night of unthinkable revelations. After that surreal encounter at the party, I left in a daze, my mind numb from the weight of the betrayal I'd just witnessed. The drive home was a blur, a haze of conflicting emotions where anger, sorrow, and disbelief tangled together, leaving me unable to process anything fully. I reached the solitude of my apartment, hoping that the quiet would offer some refuge from the storm raging inside me. Instead, silence only amplified the relentless echo of my racing thoughts. No sooner had I begun to settle into the emptiness of my home than my phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen and saw a terse message from Tyler. "You need to come back." Those 4 words, delivered with an urgency that I couldn't ignore, jolted me out of my temporary escape. It was as if Tyler knew that the night was far from over, that there was more to this nightmare than I had yet uncovered. I hesitated for a moment, caught in the grip of my own despair and the haunting memories of Amanda's indiscretion. But Tyler's message left no room for further deliberation. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I grabbed my keys and stepped back into the fray. The cold night air, did little to ease the burning turmoil inside me as I made my way back to the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I approached the door once more, the atmosphere had undeniably shifted. The party, which had earlier been a celebration of joy and camaraderie, now loomed like a stage set for the final act of a tragic play. The guests' faces were etched with shock and uncertainty. Everyone seemed to sense that the fragile facade of normalcy had finally been shattered. There was an unspoken understanding among them that tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. Inside, I immediately spotted Amanda. She was no longer the woman I had known for years. The vibrant energy that once lit up her eyes had been replaced by a hollow resignation. Standing off to one side, she appeared small and vulnerable, as if the very exposure of her hidden life had stripped her of any semblance of dignity. In that charged moment, I could see the undeniable truth staring back at me. The betrayal wasn't a fleeting mistake, but a calculated deception that had persisted for far too long. I had to know everything, every lie, every secret. With a voice that betrayed none of the devastation I felt inside, I approached her slowly and asked the question that had been gnawing at my insides. "Amanda, how long?" The silence that followed was more agonizing than any outburst of rage. Time seemed to stretch interminably as I waited for her answer. The only sound the soft hum of the distant music and the murmurs of hushed conversations around us. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, 11 months. Those words crashed over me like a tidal wave. 11 months of betrayal. Each day, each moment we had shared, now revealed to be nothing more than a well-concealed lie. I could hardly breathe as the enormity of her confession sank in. Every memory we had built together, our whispered promises in the dark, the laughter we shared on quiet evenings, was tainted by the thought that all of it had been a lie. It wasn't just a temporary lapse or a momentary error in judgment. This was a sustained affair, a secret life lived behind the facade of our everyday existence. The realization was as brutal as it was clear. Amanda's betrayal had been deliberate, meticulously hidden for nearly an entire year. As I stood there, grappling with the truth, my mind began to race, piecing together fragments of past conversations, moments of inexplicable distance, and the subtle signs that I had once dismissed as mere coincidences. It was all there, woven into the fabric of our shared history, a history that now seemed riddled with deceit and half-truths. I looked around the room, noting how every guest seemed to be holding their breath, as if they too were acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. The stunned silence was punctuated only by the soft shuffling of feet and the occasional clink of a glass. Small, insignificant sounds that now underscored the monumental collapse of trust. It was clear that no one had ever imagined that the celebration would morph into this heart-wrenching reckoning. Tyler's earlier message echoed in my mind, a stark reminder that I was not alone in this painful journey. His summoning had been abrupt, yet it carried the weight of someone who had long been aware of the underlying betrayal. In that moment, I realized that the night's revelations were not isolated incidents. They were pieces of a larger puzzle that had been forming for far too long. Amanda's eyes, once so full of life and warmth, were now clouded with regret and an almost palpable fear. The moment her confession hung in the air, it was as if the mask she had worn for the past 11 months had finally slipped away, exposing the raw vulnerability underneath. I saw in her expression a desperate hope that perhaps this brutal honesty might pave the way for some form of redemption, some chance to make amends for the unthinkable damage done. But even as that glimmer of remorse flickered, it did little to ease the pain of knowing that the betrayal had been so extensive and deliberate. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to lash out, to demand an explanation that could somehow fill the gaping void of trust now left behind. Yet another part of me was strangely detached, as if the shock had forced me into a state of resigned clarity. In that moment of painful lucidity, I recognized that the path forward would be one fraught with impossible choices and heartache. The illusion of a happy, shared future was irrevocably shattered, replaced by a reality where every smile, every shared memory, was marred by the knowledge of her deception. The revelation of 11 months of infidelity was not just a personal betrayal. It was a profound reminder of how deeply one could be deceived by the person closest to you. Each day of our married life, every seemingly mundane interaction, now carried the bitter aftertaste of lies. The knowledge that Amanda had managed to conceal this affair for so long only deepened the wound. It made every previous moment of doubt and every unexplained gesture seem not like isolated incidents, but as deliberate pieces of a much larger, sinister puzzle. And as I stood there, confronting the undeniable evidence of our crumbling relationship, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of liberation amid the chaos. The painful truth, as devastating as it was, also cleared away the layers of denial and self-deception that had clouded my judgment for so long. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was forced to face the reality of our situation without the comforting veil of ignorance. The brutality of the truth left me reeling, yet it also offered a peculiar kind of clarity, a chance to understand, to rebuild, and perhaps eventually to heal. In that moment, as Amanda's confession hung between us like a specter of our former lives, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The path ahead was murky and uncertain, marked by the wreckage of trust and the bitter aftershocks of betrayal. Yet, even in the midst of this overwhelming pain, there was a glimmer of resolve taking root. I understood that the journey to reclaim my life, to rediscover who I truly was beyond the facade of our shared past, had to begin with accepting this unvarnished truth. I took a deep, shuddering breath, summoning the strength to face what came next. The night had transformed from a celebration into a crucible of raw emotion, where every revelation carved away at the illusions I had once held dear. With Amanda's confession still echoing in my ears, I knew that I was at a crossroads, a moment that demanded not just an end, but the possibility of a new beginning, however painful it might be. As I looked into Amanda's eyes one final time, I saw not just regret, but also a silent acknowledgement of the irreversible damage done. The exposure was complete. The carefully constructed lies had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard reality of her actions. And while the truth cut deeper than I could have ever imagined, it also laid the foundation for the only way forward, a future defined not by pretense and deceit, but by a raw, unfiltered honesty that I was now determined to embrace. In that charged moment, with the echoes of 11 months of betrayal reverberating around us, I realized that the journey ahead would be one of painful choices and hard-won insights. But as I stood there, stripped of all illusions and faced with the unvarnished truth, I also felt the first stirrings of a resolve that promised to guide me through the darkness toward a future where trust could, in time, be rebuilt. If not with Amanda, then perhaps with someone new, or even with myself. The night had exposed every hidden lie, and now, with the truth laid bare for all to see, there was no turning back. I reached the point where I knew I had to stop letting her twist the situation in her favor. With every ounce of resolve I could muster, I looked Amanda straight in the eye and said, "Pack your things, you don't live here anymore." The words were out, firm and unyielding, and there was no room for her to negotiate. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the air between us seemed to freeze. Amanda's face contorted with anger and disbelief, and almost immediately, she tried to claw her way back into the picture. "I am your wife," she snapped, her tone desperate. "I have the right to half the house." Her words dripped with entitlement, as if she believed that her title alone could undo everything I had just declared. But I wasn't the fool she had hoped me to be. For months, I'd harbored suspicions and, slowly but surely, pieced together the evidence. Every inconsistency, Every late-night excuse, every text message that didn't add up had led me to this point. I had quietly collected everything. Emails, discreet video recordings, and confirmations from hotels that painted a damning picture of deceit. I knew the truth, and it was as overwhelming as it was undeniable. When I laid out the facts, the room seemed to shift, the air growing even heavier with the weight of our shared history collapsing around us. Amanda's defiant facade wavered for just a moment, a flash of terror and regret passing through her eyes. In that split second, it became clear to her that all the manipulation, all the carefully constructed lies had finally caught up with her. The evidence was irrefutable, and there was no escaping it. Without another word, Amanda turned and ran, her departure as silent as it was sudden. The sound of her footsteps fading into the distance was the final punctuation to the end of our life together. Standing there, in the aftermath of that confrontation, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the charade was over, and sorrow for the loss of the life and trust we once shared. In that decisive moment, I reclaimed control. I refused to be manipulated any longer by a person who had turned betrayal into an art form. With her departure, the door to our past closed for good. I was left with the remnants of shattered dreams and a heart heavy with the lessons of deceit, but also with a newfound clarity. I realized that this painful ending, as agonizing as it was, marked the beginning of a new chapter. One in which I would no longer allow half-truths and manipulated promises to define me. I had the evidence, the undeniable proof that had illuminated every lie and every secret. And with that, I began the slow, steady process of piecing my life back together, determined to forge a future built on honesty, even if it meant walking away from everything I once thought was unbreakable. That night, as the silence settled and the echoes of her fleeing footsteps faded away, I knew that this was truly the end. No more negotiations, no more blackmail, just a stark, raw farewell to a chapter filled with deceit. The weight of betrayal would linger for a while, a bitter reminder of the cost of misplaced trust, but it also paved the way for a journey toward a future where I could finally be free. Free from manipulation, free from lies, and free to rediscover who I truly was. I woke up the next morning in a place that felt as foreign as my own emotions. A luxury hotel room with a view that screamed extravagance. The bill, I later discovered, was $450 a night. The plush bedding and sleek decor were a stark contrast to the wreckage of the night before. It was surreal to realize that I wasn't in my own home. Instead, I was tucked away in this temporary refuge, a stopgap as I gathered my thoughts and prepared for what needed to come next. That morning, with the remnants of last night's devastation still echoing in my mind, I had already made plans. Before the day had truly begun, I was sitting in a modest yet sharply appointed law office, facing a lawyer who listened with quiet intensity as I laid out my decision. The divorce papers were drawn up quickly, and I signed them with a steadiness that surprised even me. I wasn't going to give Amanda anything more than her suitcase. Every bit of evidence I'd collected over the past 11 months, from the damning messages to the surveillance videos and the irrefutable confirmations from hotels, was a testament to her betrayal, and I intended to use it to safeguard what was mine. I made it clear, I wasn't about to let her manipulate the process and claim half the life we'd built together. The lawyer's office was a place of cold, clinical decisions, yet every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been stolen. Each document I signed was a declaration that I would no longer tolerate deceit. My plan was simple and non-negotiable. Amanda walks away with nothing more than the personal effects she could pack in a suitcase. It wasn't long after the meeting that my phone began to ring, jolting me back into a moment of familiar tension. The caller ID read Amanda. I hesitated for only a heartbeat before answering, expecting the rehearsed, pleading tone that had marked so many of her previous attempts at reconciliation. "Lucas, let's talk," she said, her voice wavering with an undercurrent of desperation and the remnants of a shared past. But there was no room for talk. No space in my heart or mind for another round of manipulation or empty promises. I took a slow, measured breath and, with a calm that belied the storm inside me, simply replied, "No." And with that, I ended the call, leaving no possibility for further negotiation. The single word was all it took to shut down any hope of a conversation that might have dragged me back into the pain of our failed marriage. That day marked the real beginning of my war for justice. A war fought not with anger or theatrics, but with deliberate, unwavering resolve. I was no longer going to allow Amanda's actions to define the remainder of my life. Instead, I was determined to reclaim control, to protect my future, and to ensure that her betrayal would have no further hold over me. Leaving the lawyer's office and stepping back into the brisk air outside, I felt a strange mix of liberation and solemn responsibility. Every step I took was measured, every decision deliberate. The luxury of that hotel room had been a brief, if costly, interlude, a pause between the collapse of one life and the careful construction of another. And as I looked ahead to the uncertain road before me, I knew that I was ready to face whatever came next with the truth as my shield and the evidence of her lies as my weapon. I woke up to a morning that felt completely different, a morning that seemed to whisper of liberation in every ray of sunlight. For the first time in 3 years, I felt free. As I slid out of the plush hotel bed, the cool, crisp air of the city greeted me like an old friend, refreshing and unburdened by the weight of betrayal. It was a stark contrast to the confined, chaotic energy of my previous days, and it marked the beginning of something new. Over the past few years, I had allowed Amanda's deception to chain me to a past filled with manipulation and heartache. Every day had been a reminder of the lies that once dictated my emotions. Every moment a replay of a betrayal that I had reluctantly endured. But now, with the evidence of her treachery firmly in hand and the painful process of our divorce behind me, I was finally reclaiming my life. I wasn't that naive, blinded fool anymore. I was a man who had seen through the facade, who had gathered every scrap of truth until the lies fell away like dust in the wind. As I strolled through the city streets, every step felt like a declaration, a rejection of the control Amanda once wielded over my heart and mind. I could feel the support of my friends and family wrapping around me like a protective shield. Their encouragement, their unspoken affirmations in every nod and smile, reminded me that I was never alone. In the midst of my personal storm, I had discovered a profound truth. I was not a victim, but a survivor. I had fought hard to extricate myself from a web of deceit, and, with every breath, was slowly piecing together the person I was meant to be. That very day, as I met up with those who had stood by me through the worst of times, a sense of camaraderie and celebration filled the air. Tyler, always the beacon of both humor and insight, clinked his glass with a warm smile and declared, "This party will go down in history." His words resonated not as a mere comment about a memorable evening, but as a triumphant proclamation, a symbol of the end of an era defined by manipulation, and the beginning of a future where I controlled my own destiny. It was a reminder that even amidst chaos and pain, there could be moments of clarity and celebration. I couldn't help but reflect on that decisive moment when I ended Amanda's desperate plea for another conversation with a single, unyielding word. No, in that brief exchange, I had drawn a line in the sand, a line that said, "I will not be manipulated. I will not be defined by your lies." That word reverberated in my mind throughout the day, echoing the strength I found in finally saying enough was enough. It wasn't about spite or anger. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, my freedom, my dignity, and my future. The pain of the past years had been profound, but so, too, had been the lessons they taught me. Every sleepless night, every tear shed in quiet moments, had forged within me an inner resilience I never knew existed. I began to understand that the journey through betrayal was not just about escaping the clutches of another's deceit. It was about rediscovering my own worth. I had been conditioned to believe that I was powerless, that I was defined by the actions of someone I had once trusted. Now, liberated from that toxic narrative, I saw clearly. I was strong, independent, and capable of building a life where no one else's mistakes would dictate my happiness. Standing amidst friends who cheered, not just for the end of a painful chapter, but for the birth of a new beginning, I felt the weight of my past dissipate. It was as if every shared laugh, every heartfelt conversation, was a stitch in the fabric of a new identity, one woven from the threads of resilience and self-respect. I looked around at the faces of those who supported me, and in their eyes, I saw the reflection of a man who had finally taken charge of his destiny. In that moment, I realized that Amanda's hold over me had been nothing more than an illusion that I had shattered with the truth and a quiet determination to never be deceived again. I was free from the chains of manipulation, free from the lingering doubts that had once haunted every corner of my mind. The person I was yesterday had been consumed by betrayal, but today I was someone entirely new, a person who had fought hard to regain control and who now reveled in the purity of his own strength. As the day wore on, the sun continued its steady climb across the sky, each moment reinforcing the sense of renewal that pulsed within me. I found myself smiling at the simplest things, a gentle breeze, the distant hum of the city, the reassuring warmth of genuine friendship. Each of these moments was a victory over the past, a clear signal that I was no longer defined by the mistakes and deceptions that had once threatened to drown me. Instead, I was free to be whoever I wanted to be, unburdened by the ghosts of a life that no longer served me. I recalled the long, agonizing hours when every memory of Amanda had felt like a chain wrapped around my heart. But now, those memories were just that, memories that no longer held power over my present or future. I had learned to see them for what they were, painful experiences that had shaped me, yes, but that no longer determined my worth or my ability to love again. In their place, a newfound sense of self-respect and inner peace took root, a peace that was hard-earned and unshakable. Tyler's words, echoing in my mind as the party continued around us, underscored the irony of the evening. What had begun as a celebration of someone else's birthday had transformed into a historic moment for me, a moment where I shed the skin of victimhood and stepped boldly into a future of my own making. "This party will go down in history," he had said, and in that declaration, I found a promise of better days, of nights filled with laughter untainted by regret, and of a life finally free from the shadows of deceit. Now, with every supportive handshake, every encouraging word, and every shared smile, I felt a deep and abiding certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. I had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. I had been betrayed, hurt, and deceived, yet none of that had the power to define me anymore. Instead, it had become the fuel that propelled me forward, a catalyst for change, and a beacon of hope that shone brightly in the aftermath of the storm. I embraced the day with an open heart, knowing that my journey was far from over, but confident that I would continue to grow, to learn, and to love in ways that were truer to myself than ever before. I was no longer a victim, and I was no longer the man who had once allowed someone else's lies to dictate his every move. I was free to live, to laugh, and to build a future that celebrated every hard-fought victory over the past. As I stepped forward into this new chapter, I carried with me the lessons of those dark days and the strength I had discovered within myself. The support of everyone around me, the unyielding truth of the evidence I had collected, and the resolute determination to never be deceived again had all culminated in this moment of undeniable freedom. I was the master of my own destiny now, and nothing, not even the echoes of betrayal, could take that away from me. In that profound sense of liberation, I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that the journey ahead was filled with endless possibilities. Each step was a testament to my resilience, each breath a celebration of the truth that I had finally reclaimed my life. And as I looked out at the world, bathed in the soft glow of a new dawn, I knew with unwavering certainty that I was no longer defined by my past. I was defined by the courage to move forward, by the strength to stand tall, and by the freedom to be unapologetically me. This was more than just the end of a painful chapter. It was the beginning of an entirely new story. A story where I was in control, where every moment was mine to shape, and where the promise of tomorrow shone brighter than any shadow that had once darkened my path. And in that promise, I found the ultimate victory, the freedom to live my life on my own terms, forever unbound and finally truly free. The night's adrenaline had barely faded when I woke to the stark reality that Amanda wasn't the type to simply vanish without a fight. Even though I'd spent the last few days dismantling her grip over my life, I knew full well she'd stop at nothing to claw her way back. As dawn crept over the city skyline, I couldn't shake the image of her scheming eyes or the desperate tone in her last messages. I was fully aware that she'd be plotting, waiting for any chance to manipulate the situation further, and I was determined to be 10 steps ahead. This morning was different. I left the plush confines of my hotel room, a temporary haven that had become my launch pad for this new chapter, and made my way to a law firm known for its no-nonsense approach. The air was crisp, charged with the resolve of someone who had finally taken control of his destiny. Every step toward the glass doors of the office felt like a march toward my own liberation. I wasn't just filing divorce papers. I was meticulously tying up every loose end, ensuring that Amanda couldn't siphon off even a scrap of what was mine. Inside the lawyer's office, I was greeted by a calm, measured atmosphere that belied the storm of emotions swirling within me. The lawyer wasted no time getting down to business. We went through every document, every piece of evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past 11 months. There were emails, text messages, surveillance videos, and even hotel confirmations, proof that painted an unassailable picture of her betrayal. As he flipped through the files, a wry smile played at the corners of his lips. Leaning back in his chair, he said, "She has no idea what she's gotten herself into." His words, delivered with a mix of amusement and professional certainty, sent a clear message. I wasn't going to let Amanda's schemes take root in my life any longer. Every document signed that day felt like another brick laid in the fortress of my newfound freedom. The lawyer's steady, reassuring presence made it clear that every detail of the divorce was being handled with the precision of a well-oiled machine. I wasn't just ending a relationship. I was dismantling the entire framework of deceit that had once threatened to bury me. With every signature, I could feel the weight of the past lifting, replaced by the resolute determination to ensure Amanda's grip on my future was permanently broken. Leaving the office, the cool afternoon light seemed to carry with it the promise of a fresh start. The murmurs of the city and the distant hum of traffic were oddly comforting in their normalcy, a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. I paused for a moment on the busy sidewalk, letting the gravity of the day's decisions settle into my bones. The chaos of the past weeks had taught me one crucial lesson. I was never going to be the victim again. I wasn't the fool who'd been deceived or manipulated. I was now the one in control, and every move from this point on would be calculated, strategic, and unyielding. As I walked away from the building, a quiet, determined whisper escaped my lips. A promise and a threat rolled into one. Tomorrow I'm going to destroy everything she thought she could take from me. Those words reverberated in my mind, a mantra that encapsulated my resolve. They weren't just about legal victories or the careful dismantling of a shared life. They were about reclaiming every piece of dignity and self-respect I'd lost over the years. Amanda might still be lurking in the shadows, scheming and conniving, but I had prepared every contingency. I had turned the tables, and now I was ready to ensure that every asset, every ounce of trust, and every cherished memory that wasn't rightfully mine would remain solely in my possession. The path ahead was uncharted, fraught with potential challenges and unforeseen obstacles. Yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt invincible, a man armed with undeniable evidence and an unwavering resolve to never be deceived again. The calm determination in my eyes wasn't just the aftermath of a broken marriage. It was the dawning of a new era in my life, one where I held all the cards and where Amanda's illusions of control would crumble into dust. In that moment, as the city around me carried on in its indifferent rhythm, I knew that the real war for justice had only just begun. I had taken the first decisive steps to ensure that Amanda's manipulation would no longer dictate my future. And tomorrow, when the pieces were set in motion and every carefully laid plan sprang into action, I would ignite a transformation so complete that nothing she once believed she could claim would ever be within her grasp again.